Hi, I'm Moby, and at this point, in the middle of May, I had sort of been planning on doing a very short tour. But, as you can imagine, like most musicians, I've had to stay home instead. Luckily, and I feel sort of guilty saying this, I like staying home. So rather than go out and go on tour and play music and talk about this new album, I thought I would just sit here and talk to you, whoever you might be, about this new album. So to try and keep this even mildly entertaining, I'm going to try and move around a little bit so it's not just one middle-aged guy sitting in the same spot talking self-involvedly about his new record. Although I guess it is a middle-aged guy sitting and talking self-involvedly about his new record. It's a quote from Moby Dick, written by my great-great-great-granduncle Herman Melville. How it relates to the music, I have no idea. I was born in Harlem, in Morningside Heights, and I spent the first couple of years of my life living there. And this first song, Morningside, in some ways it's like homage or an inspiration from the electronic dance music I heard when I was growing up and what it felt like to be driving through Manhattan, or walking through Manhattan, or like trying to find a club somewhere on the Lower East Side, or in the way far west reaches of the West Village or of Chelsea, and like the emptiness but the warmth and the way the sound sounded bouncing between the buildings. And so this first song, Morningside, is sort of inspired by that feeling of listening to electronic dance music on the empty streets of New York. Years and years and years and years ago, I dropped out of college or university and I needed a job. And I was sleeping on my mom's couch and I was despondent, I was having panic attacks. And an old friend of mine, my mom's, named Johnny, had a record store in the town where I lived called Johnny's. And he very kindly gave me a job. And so I went from being this, despondent, panicking kid sleeping on his mom's couch to working in a record store. Granted, I was making $2.85 an hour, but still, I was working in a record store. And most of the money I made, I just bought records. And I started obsessively collecting Roxy music records. Because I would say that in terms of the history of popular music, they've had one of the weirdest careers. Like most people know them from, romantic songs like Avalon and More Than This, but their early days, they were, Brian Eno was in the band and they were really odd and experimental and glam. And I love everything they ever did, even the sort of schmaltzy pop songs. And My Only Love is just such a beautiful song. And I thought it'd be very interesting to do it with a female vocalist. So my friend Mindy Jones, who has a truly beautiful voice, she kindly agreed to sing. So it's one of the many cover songs I've done in my life. It's My Only Love by Roxy Music. There was one club I only went to a few times. I don't even know if it was open for very long. It's called Indochine. It was underneath Indochine. And I think I went there in 1989, 1990. And it was one of the first places I ever heard house music played really loud. Mark Kamens was DJing. And back then, I mean, New York was such an eclectic melting pot, and the crowds at these clubs were straight and gay and black and white and Asian and Latin. It was just this eclectic, wonderful melting pot. And so musically, this song is sort of inspired by that experience. And then the vocals were provided by Linton Kwesi Johnson. And going back to my early days working at Johnny's Records, it was through Johnny that I was introduced to a lot of the spoken word Jamaican poets like Muda Baruka and Linton Kwesi Johnson. And Linton Kwesi Johnson, I've just always loved his voice, and I love these lyrics. They're dark and hopeful and vaguely apocalyptic, but sensitive at the same time.
Thankless toil, silence has no meaning. To us, word of necessary birth, for the earth's hard and thankless toil, silence has no meaning. Silence has no meaning.
Oh, I just realized there's some stuff I forgot to tell you. One, we're in my studio. Maybe that would be self-evident because there's equipment and a microphone. But I just thought that I would mention that as I'm talking about music, it probably made sense to do this in my studio. Maybe that's a little too obvious. If so, I apologize. But I love my little studio. I've had bigger studios, I've had fancier studios, but I realize I'm sort of happiest working in a small, almost monastic space that's in my house. Like for a while, I had a studio outside of my house, and I really missed it. I really missed living and working in the exact same place. It's one of the wonderful things about having a studio in my house is I can be working on music, mixing something, and making spaghetti at the same time. And I don't know, some people love leaving their house to go to work, and I just love working at home. It's the only song on the record that I actually sing, because generally I don't really like the sound of my voice. And it might be one of the first times I've ever, singing in, I guess, what would technically be called a falsetto. I don't know if falsetto is a real word. People use it, but I think we all use it incorrectly. But in any case, this is me sort of singing in a falsetto. I'm sure that there's an actual technical, wonderful Italian classical music term that I don't know for it. And the song is about our species. That sounds pretty clinical, right? But it's about how we keep making these terrible mistakes, and the consequences of our mistakes just keep getting worse and worse and worse. And at some point, we won't be able to make mistakes anymore. So, I guess it's a vaguely apocalyptic song, but hopefully there's something beautiful and inspiring in there as well. But it is, if there are future generations, they will look back at us and just simply ask the question, like, what the hell were you doing? Like, you only had one home. Why did you treat it like a garbage dump?
One more
So I've always loved political songs, and I always wanted to write political songs. There's a problem. I'm not very good at writing political songs. Like, I'm obsessed with politics, but I think of, the great political anthems written by Cat Stevens or Joe Strummer or Neil Young or Chuck D or Kendrick or Rage Against the Machine. Like, I've always wanted to be able to write those kind of songs, but I just have never been able to. So this song, Power Is Taken, is sort of an homage to, agitprop political music. And the vocals, D.H. Peligro from the Dead Kennedys is the lead vocalist on this. And it's one of the things I love about being a middle-aged musician, that you get to work with these people that you idolized from afar when you were a little kid. Like, I remember getting fresh fruit for rotting vegetables when I was 15. I don't think DH played on that, but nonetheless, like, just being an obsessive Dead Kennedys fan, and then years later becoming friends with DH and having him on this song. So, and also because Power Is Taken, we made an actual official real video for it. So rather than just one of my little homemade clips, let's play a sizable chunk of Power Is Taken.
Oppression must fight against the oppressors. Power is not shared. Power is taken.
We who hate oppression must fight against the oppressor. Power is not shared. Power is taken.
We who hate oppression
must fight against the oppressors.
Power is not shared.
Power is taken.
We who hate oppression
must fight against the oppressors.
Power is not shared.
So when I was growing up, especially when I lived in Stratford, Connecticut, I mainly grew up poor white trash in Darien, Connecticut, but I also was poor white trash in Stratford, Connecticut, very briefly. My mom, for a while, took me to gospel services, to gospel churches, storefront gospel churches. And then when I first left home, I lived in an abandoned factory. And in my neighborhood, there were also a lot of gospel storefront churches, and I would walk by them on Sundays, and I would listen. And I've always loved, really honest, emotional gospel music. And the vocalist on this song, Denise Apollo Jane, I'm never quite sure what I should... Denise Apollo Jane, I'm sorry if I've blown your cover by saying that your name is Denise. But her vocals on this are so beautiful, and they're really inspired by very old, almost 19th century traditional gospel. I mean, the song itself is an almost, I would say, dub-inspired techno track, if those words and genres go together at all. So, Rise Up in Love.
One of these days, gonna rise up in
So this next song is called Forever. I believe, because I'm not very original when it comes to titles, that I might actually have another song called Forever. I mean, it's not a great title to begin with, and of course that means I've used it twice. And this song, so I guess it was around 2008, 2002, 2007, 2008. I hadn't DJ'd in a long time, like a really long time. I'd mainly been touring, playing live, and I got back into DJing, and it really sort of renewed my love for emotional electronic dance music. You know, especially like the big breakdowns, you know, the snare fills, the, you know, filtered noises going up. And so this song, Forever, I didn't really mix it like a big, you know, anthem, but the inspiration was that moment when you're in a crowd, wherever that might be, in a nightclub, in a stadium, in a field, on a beach, and things just seem perfect. You know, the music is perfect, the air is warm. So that was really the inspiration for this song, and also the sort of the impermanence of it. You know, that moment when, you know, the world feels perfect, but we also understand it won't last. Not to be a bummer, but that's just a statement of fact. And that sort of the gentle impermanence of it. So this song, Forever, is very much inspired by that, you know, melodic electronic music and that, as I said, like a sense of gentle impermanence. It started with just improvised piano in my living room, and then I wrote some very simple vocal melodies and some lyrics, and she came over and she sang them, everything done in one take. And it was one of those, we finished it right before this pandemic started. And it was one of those moments where I was like, oh, I wish that this song didn't feel appropriate. I wish it wasn't apt and relevant. You know, I wish that we lived in this time of like joy and celebration where everything was okay and we, you know, climate change had been ended. We weren't using animals for food. All of our energy was sustainable and there were no pandemic viruses killing people. But sadly, that's not the world we live in. And so sadly, this song, Too Much Change, seems to be unfortunately relevant.
How are we supposed to stay? There's too much change. There's too much change.
There are only two instruments in the whole song. There's piano and there's synthesizer. One of my biggest indulgences, at least I think it's a big indulgence, was buying a piano. I grew up listening to my mom playing piano, and although I studied classical guitar and music theory when I was growing up, I never took piano lessons. And so I've always loved just sitting down at the piano and playing oftentimes I don't know what I'm playing. I mean, I can tell you roughly what the chords are, but like in terms of different tone clusters and chord voices, like I just kind of make stuff up, and it makes me really happy to play it. And lately I started recording it. And so this is just improvised piano that I recorded. And then I played a very sort of simple, plaintive synth line on top of it. And that's the whole song. There's no drums, no vocals. It's just, I think, a really quiet, pretty piece of music. And the title, Separation, I guess it's this recurring theme in our lives, in my life, in this record, is the idea of being separated from objectivity, or separated from the divine, or separated from truth, separated from direct experience of the universe, whatever you want to call it, separated from God. And that's why the song is called Separation. It's an acronym, and it's also the name of a script I'm trying to write. At some point, hopefully, I'll finish writing this script. It's about animal rights, and I will tell you what Tessie stands for, if you're interested. Like I said, it's an acronym. And of course, you move to Los Angeles, you have to write screenplays. I think it's sort of in the LA charter, especially middle-aged guys who are sober. But I wanted to write a screenplay specifically about animal rights. I haven't finished it, so I shouldn't even be talking about it, because maybe I'll never finish it, maybe it'll be terrible, but I want this piece of music, Tessie, to be the soundtrack or the central song or theme from this movie I'm trying to make. So this is Tessie. All Visible Objects, album title, name of this song. And this is a quiet piece of instrumental music. It started with improvised piano. And again, that recurring theme that I've talked about of separation, of being inherently, fundamentally prevented from knowing objective truth, from knowing who and what we are. I almost think, even though I'm not a Christian in any normal sense of the word, that one of the opening images of the Old Testament, of humanity leaving the Garden of Eden, leaving the presence of God. Like, I'm not talking Judeo-Christian history or dogma, just saying that idea of leaving the presence of God. Something about humanity has separated us from objective truth, from the divine. And maybe that's just inherent to biological life or to humanity, is that separation. Or maybe it's just us, or maybe at some point we can heal it. I have no idea. In the meantime, regardless of the apocalypse, regardless of the pandemic, there's still so much beauty in the world, and there's so much, even if we're separated from objective truth and objective knowledge, we can still look at things. We can still look at a beautiful day. We can still, eat food that heals us and isn't the product of suffering. We can still, we can still experience, for lack of a better word, the divine, even if we're separated from it. One last thing. What I've been trying to do is to take the records that I make, the books that I make, my restaurant, and whatever profits are generated, I try to give them to animal rights organizations and environmental organizations, because honestly, I love making things. I don't need to make money from them. I live a pretty simple life. So, my hope is that the things that I work on, I personally don't profit from them. I love making them. I love sharing them. I feel like I'm very fortunate, and it's a luxury that I don't have to worry about making money from them. So it's my best intention for the money that I make from these records and books and other projects that it goes to animal rights and environmental and human rights organizations. So I think I've talked way too much, and thank you I think I probably talked longer than the length of the album. I hope that's not the case. So thank you for listening and watching, and I hope we get through this pandemic, and I hope that we are able to go to a new normal where we get rid of the worst aspects of the old normal, because we only have one home, and treating it like a garbage dump, it's not only stupid, it just doesn't make any sense. Thanks.